Now it's my pleasure to welcome a number of small business owners who are representative of multi-generational families, multi-generational stores, and immigrant stores. I'm going to just call them up in the random way that seems to be on my notes. We have Peter Madonia from the Madonia Bakery. Peter. Peter runs the Madonia Bakery in Belmont, Little Italy, Arthur Avenue. The Bronx is Little Italy. His grandparents, Mary and Rose, opened the bakery in 1918. His father was literally born there. Following a successful career in government and philanthropy, Peter has been running the business since 1988? My goodness. I'm not going to steal too many of his stories because he's got some good ones. Do Kham, Dechen, and my pronunciation is terrible. I blame the New York City public school system. And Kunsang, Kelden. They're the co-owners of Do Kham, founded in 1988 as one of the first Tibetan-owned businesses in America. They grew up in the family business, officially joining ownership with their father in 2017. They've played a vital role in modernizing business and developing strategies, as well as to continue it, as well as developing strategies. And a recent move from the store from its original Soho location to the East Village. They are very active in the Kalmyk. Did I pronounce that? Thank you. The Kalmyk community in the United States, one of the largest, most prominent ones is in New Jersey, where they're from. And they have developed programs empowering youth as well as highlighting Tibetan and Mongolian arts and culture. In the 30 years of business, Do Kham has remained grounded in Tibetan culture and Buddhism, also bridging the gap between Tibet and the West, both spiritually and fashion. Then also, Yajaira. Okay, again. Lousy pronunciation. Again, I blame Brooklyn. Yajaira Saavedra, sorry about that, is the notorious dishwasher of La Morada in the Bronx. In Mount Haven, it was La Morada was voted best mole poblano by Grub Street. She's the daughter of Natalia Mendez and Antonio Saavedra. The restaurant opened in 2009 and to great acclaim. She is very active, and her family is very active both in the restaurant and politically and in the media. Her sister was actually on Celebrity Chef. She and her family have been very active in political issues involving immigration. Morada is a DACA dreamer. And has been working to bring that issue to light. The restaurant has a lending library as a way of getting the community involved, mostly running on documented books and that. And most recently, she said that she was recently arrested and released because she was filming a police officer behaving poorly. So again. Forgive my sort of rude notes. A round of applause for our panelists. And the way, and let me circulate some. There we go. Perfect. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to have all of our panelists sort of speak for 5 or so minutes, just talking about their experiences with it, with some leading questions, and then hopefully have an open dialogue about it. My first question, and Ian is now bringing it out. Do we got that? And Do Kham has the presentation, which Michelle will load up because I can't do 2 things at once. I can barely do 1 thing at once. So the first question, and I'll sort of address it and run down the line, is can you sort of give us what is your business? What can you talk about what your business is and when was it created? Who started it? Peter?
Yep, thank you. My grandfather, we have a bakery business, Italian bakery business up in Little Italy in the Bronx. Some people know it as Arthur Avenue. My grandfather came over from Monreale, Sicily in 1918 with my grandmother, ran the family business. He worked on a lemon farm in Sicily, and somewhere he learned how to bake, and he was pretty damn good at it. They opened a small shop in what was a burgeoning Italian-American community, immigrant community, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because many of the stonemasons that built the Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Garden, and Fordham University worked there and then formed this community, which is in walking distance to those three institutions. It remained a primarily, and I mean 99.5% Italian community, probably into the late 1980s, early 1990s. When I grew up there, you didn't have to speak English. People shopped every day for their food, went home, cooked, came out the next day, shopped again. There are still remain there multiple generational businesses like mine. I'm a third generation. There are, now 101 years old, we celebrated our 100th anniversary last year. There are probably half a dozen to 10 that are close to 100 or 100. There are many of them that are 75 to 85 years old, still family generational businesses in this one ecosystem, and I like to call it an ecosystem because we do feed off of each other. We also feed off this larger ecosystem, which includes the Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Garden, and Fordham University. And I earlier talked about what sustains businesses and neighborhood businesses. One of the things is how your neighborhood evolves, and we were very lucky to have those institutions around us because we also went through the blackout of 1977. This neighborhood is in the poorest congressional district in the United States of America, and it has managed to sustain itself as a very, very vibrant economic engine for the Bronx, and certainly for our immediate surroundings. Part of it is people and families who stayed through some pretty tough times in the mid 70s, late 70s, and then again in the early 90s. Some own their buildings, some don't. We've heard how important that is to sustainability. It is critical, because if you're actually successful in your business, in 20 years, your rent's going to go through the roof and you're not going to be successful anymore. So that does happen a lot. We've managed to evolve our business because our clientele has changed. We don't have a neighborhood clientele per se. It really is people who come into the neighborhood to shop in a very big Little Italy by today's standards. We have 3 Salamarias, we have 4 bakeries, we have 4 pasticcerias, we have 4 butcher shops. So there's healthy competition. It keeps prices down and quality up. And people who want good quality Italian products come to shop there. But we also have this new clientele from those institutions that are drawing new families all the time to the zoo and to the garden. And so we've had to evolve our products as well. And that's, again, part of how you sustain a business for 100 years. We make all the traditional things my grandfather made, but we also make bread, jalapeno bread, and things like that. So you'll hear more from others, but this notion of how to sustain a business that long through generations is a really fascinating one. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
The name of the business and the
Madonia Bakery. It's my last name, Madonia, Madonia. Yeah, and it's 2348 Arthur Avenue.
Hi, so my name is Dechen, and this is my sister Kunsang, and we're from Do Kham. So Do Kham is a Tibetan clothing shop that's, we started out on Prince Street. My mom is actually here, and this business was started by my mom and my father, and then Palge Kelden. And my mother's background is she's Kalmyk Mongolian, and she is a photographer of Mongolian and Tibetan arts and culture, as well as a photographer who has photographed visits of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to different areas, Nepal, India, and his first visit to the United States. My father was born in Tibet, and he was formerly a monk with Nechung Monastery. And my sister can give you a little bit more background on Tibet. But the store in itself, we started out in 1988 on Prince Street. And at the time, we had one location, and 1988, our rent was $700 a month. And as you know, it's drastically changed since then. At the time, 1988 was 700. Then we expanded to the shop next door, which was another small shop. So both of those combined was about 1,500. And as the years went on, the rent kept increasing, and ultimately we were forced out of that location. We moved to the East Village in 2017. So if you, do you want to maybe go back in the slides?
Sure. So are we going to...
However you'd like to do it.
Yeah, maybe if you can start in the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a photo of our new location. And just to give some background, so Tibet is located right above the Himalayas. And it's between there, to the east is China, and above is Mongolia, and below is India and Nepal. And so Tibet was occupied by China in the early 1950s. And then, since then, our father left in 1959 when His Holiness the Dalai Lama left. There are 6 million Tibetans living in Tibet. There are around 165,000 Tibetans living in exile, mostly in communities in Nepal and India. And in the US, there are around 20,000 Tibetans living in the United States. In New York City, there's probably between 8,000 or 9,000. And over the years, with resettlement programs of Tibetans coming to communities throughout the United States, there was an influx of Tibetans coming to New York City around the 90s. But before then, there really weren't that many Tibetans in New York. So when we started in 1988, we were one of the first Tibetan businesses in all of America. And over the years, there were many, many Tibetan businesses in New York City. But over time, a lot of them had to close because of rent increases. And they were all over the city. Mainly, most of the Tibetan community lives around the Jackson Heights, Queens area, but they're really all over. And
Should we go up there and do it?
yeah, do you want us to do the
actually,
thing?
we
Or
can probably just go up here.
actually, the
There's
clicker
a
would be
thing.
great.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
so what we do as a business is by also with the interest of Tibet in fashion and culture and Buddhism, we've kind of at the same time been able to offer things from Tibet and the Himalayas to do with clothing and jewelry and offering, different items in that sense.
You can just say slide.
Should I? Okay. Is it not going? Okay.
No.
You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So these are some examples of some of the items that we have that are a mixture of Tibetan culture, Mongolian culture. This is actually a Mongolian lamb coat. This is a modernized version of a traditional Tibetan style hat made with fox fur and silk brocade, which comes from India. And then some of the other items, like this velvet jacket, is actually from India, and many of the items like this Tibetan singing bowl are manufactured in Nepal. And that's kind of in the history of trade and merchants and things like that, of dealing with these different Himalayan communities. It is kind of reflective of how it's always been in terms of nomadic communities, of kind of a mixture of different cultures. So if you want to, can we go to the next slide? So like over time, we've been profiled by different outlets like New York Times and Style and different things. And the interest, I think, in fashion, both in Tibet, in India, all of these things that has expanded over the past 30 years. We've kind of been involved in that process, which has been really nice. But also at the same time, in Soho, as it's developed from where it started, which didn't look like anything of what it is today, we all kind of evolved together. But at the same time, it just became way too expensive for us to remain in that place, and it's just not sustainable, like as a small family business. So if we can go to the next slide, these are just some other examples of different types of fashion that we have been able to produce. And then the next one, I think.
Well, just
Do you want to
sticking
talk about that?
on this slide here. So this is an example of us offering clothing that is traditional, like the outfit that I'm wearing. That's a traditional jacket that's from Tibet. But what my sister is wearing on the side, this is an adaptation of a traditional Tibetan dress that is made with raw silk, and a lot of people have worn this for like evening gatherings and weddings and things of that nature. We also have the hat that's on this side. That's the modernized version of a traditional Tibetan washa hat. So it's made with silk brocade in the center, and it's more fitted. Oh, yes, okay. And if you can go to the next slide. So this is also an example of the traditional Tibetan dress that was kind of cut in half to just act as a wrap skirt with a beaded top. A lot of people have worn this for proms and events. Would you like to explain the center image?
Actually, the center image is, this coat is actually from Uzbekistan. And then, the top is just the top half, the top version made into a shirt of a Tibetan dress. And then that one is also from India. So if you can go to the next slide, what's nice in the interest in Tibetan culture and arts, people that we've become friends with over the years is also really been key to our survival as a business. And because people have gotten to know us as a family, but also have been interested in Tibetan culture or Buddhism or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that being able to convey these things or convey information and share Tibetan culture in this way, we've been able to build these relationships which really has been the key to our survival. We wouldn't have been able to last this long without making friends and developing that kind of relationship with the people in our community. So it's been nice to be able to do that, and at the same time, being able to develop our own interests, which are also involved with activism for Tibet and cultural projects featuring things that I personally am interested in terms of music and art in contemporary Tibet, and also projects to do with Tibetan and Mongolian youth. And I think that's been a nice balance. Even just being here in this building has been really cool, because historically the Czech Republic and Václav Havel have been very, very good friends and Tibet supporters and good friends of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And even just a few years ago, actually it was in 2016, when the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping was visiting Prague, there were a dozen activists who were arrested by doing an action during his visit. And while the Chinese president was driving from the airport, they had also made a big billboard photo of Václav Havel and His Holiness, so that the Chinese president would see it as he was driving to visit their president. So it's kind of nice to see that we have these kind of connections where you can find them.
Mm-hmm. But that's also been a really important part of building our community. Like in the photo up here, we have this was actually our opening party at our East Village location on 1st and 7th. So we have our friends from the Tibetan Freedom Movement, Tibetans and allies. Our friend Diane with the red hair, she actually staged a protest in Beijing during the 2008 Olympics. We have Students for a Free Tibet, board members and staff. We have friends from International Campaign for Tibet, High Peaks Pure Earth, which helps directly translate reports of human rights abuses that are coming out of Tibet. This is the kind of community that we're cultivating through ourselves and through the store. It's really, and going back to our press, it's interesting because it's not just about, when we're interviewed for the store, it's really not just about us and our designs, it's about the whole story of Tibet, how we even came to be here. And I think especially in the early days, in the 80s, that was very essential in understanding all of the, 8 to 10,000 Tibetans that came to New York and understanding our story and our background. Yeah. So, the photo on the top with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that was actually from October 2017. We organized a program with the Central Tibetan Administration for Tibetans of Mixed Heritage, and that was during our meeting with the Dalai Lama.
Okay.
So I think there's just one last slide, and I think it's just us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is our address, and we have like social media with Facebook and Instagram, and that's our email address and our address in the East Village. So come and visit us when you can. But thank you, that's it.
Thank you. And I'm going to get to questions about social media. Yajaira?
Hi, my name is Yajaira Saavedra, and my whole family is from a small village of San Miguel, Ahuehuetlán, located in Oaxaca, Mexico. We're Mixtec. So I am a proud indigenous woman. I don't consider myself undocumented or an immigrant because I am indigenous, so I'm home. So what we do at La Morada is a Oaxacan restaurant. We keep our traditional, our meals very traditional. We serve indigenous food, such as mole. All the recipes, I don't know them. I can't tell you the secret because that is just carried through. It's like our family heirloom, and that was given to my sister. For us, cooking is very spiritual in the sense that we believe in nurturing people, not just feeding them or selling a plate. So any feelings of aggression or negativity cannot go into the kitchen. So the cook always has to be at peace. And also the vegetables, any of the ingredients that we use, they have to be meant to be cooked. So if it's overripe or just too early picked, then we sense a sense of greed rather than nurturing. And all of that connects us to the earth as indigenous folks. And as indigenous folks, we also have to care not only for our land, but also for our neighbors, our brethren. And that is why La Morada, we say that, the first panelist said that small businesses is the flavor of of New York, right? But we say that activism is our main spice. We are very vocal with anything being local activist, as well as anything that deals with immigration. We're really strong about prison abolitionists. We believe in transformative and restorative justice, and reparations are long overdue, especially in the South Bronx. With that said, I am here to say that the reason why we are in existence, regardless of the limited resources due to our status, where we don't benefit of any of the grants or any of the loans, we're here due to our community because they stood by us. All our tables, our decor, everything, so most of our food is grown in the community gardens or in people's backyard. It's hyper local. Our tables were donated. Everything was built by the community. So we are a living testimony of how if we give back, if we take care of our community also looks out and takes care of us. I could say this very briefly. I was arrested in January because I recorded a plainclothes officer arresting a neighbor. I don't know this person, but this person was walking in front of my restaurant, therefore that person is my neighbor. But I'm also aware of stop and frisk and broken windows policies that highly discriminate and racially target my neighbors. So I started recording while I was inside the restaurant. Shortly after, I got arrested because I refused to stop recording. I believed it was my duty as a neighbor, as a small business, to always look out for my community members. And because I was arrested as a DACA holder, that's really, really big. Any criminal activity or any sort of like anything that goes in my record could ultimately lead to my deportation. What my neighbors did, the neighborhood went and packed the 40th precinct, and within hours I was released without any charges. Again, this is how our community sustains ourselves. This is how the ecosystem works. This is how community is built. Is trust in each other, is sharing resources, is looking out for each other. It's not necessarily competing. It's not falling into this capitalist society, but rather going back to our indigenous roots of community. And we could see that more in La Morada through is open lending library, which is like you just drop a book, pick a book, no questions asked. And that would spur from us, honestly, like we were so poor, we didn't have TVs. Our only entertainment were books. And we were spending so much time on La Morada that we decided to bring over all of our books and just share them with the community, especially after we heard that there were no bookstores available in the Bronx. So we made that available to everybody in the community. And shortly after, a lot of teachers, a lot of other community members just started bringing boxes and boxes of books too. And folks just started picking up. And I will say like every other 2 weeks, we have a whole new set of books available. They fly really fast. And we are so proud to serve the community because we're in depth with them.
Thank you. One thing that strikes me with all of your stories is the sort of through line of community and the role that institutions, businesses really play in both supporting it and representing it and perpetuating these communities throughout, in some cases, decades and decades, and actually, in decades and decades, and almost 100 years. What challenges are there in balancing that in dealing with the changing community, because New York has changes all the time, and the people within your immediate community alter and shift, and your community is not even geographically based necessarily. So any sort of thoughts on how you remain community leaders in a changing world would be really
Yeah, so we start to think out of the box. And more of like, I see necessity is the mother of inventions with us. So when it comes to politics, that it's always changing, we always ask the person who's affected, undocumented or African American person, what is it that you need? Or a homeless person, what is it that you need? We go straight to the source, and from there, we also ask, what do you want us to do? Either attend a rally, sign a petition, bail somebody out, give them a recommendation letter. We're there. And we could tell you, like, the South Bronx is known for, has that bad stigma of being dangerous and having all these crimes. But we could tell you that every single morning when we open up, the front, everything is swept by a community member. Sometimes we don't know who it is, but people will we've gotten out of that store so tired and forgotten to lock up, and it's like nothing happened overnight because people look out for each other. So it's always not necessarily, we don't go to elected officials until we know what is needed, and we make sure to make room, make sure that La Morada is a platform. So sometimes it's also about a matter of standing behind. It's a matter of doing the dirty dishes. That's why I carry the title of a dishwasher. Not as anything. The other thing, it's like, we as a family took the initiative to take roles. My sister cooks. She knows everything, all the recipes by heart. But because nobody had a degree, people looked down at us because nobody's a chef here. You need that title. So we were like, sister, go to school and get that degree. She got that degree. With myself, I saw how technology was evolving. So I went to school to be a full stack developer. And I built a website with a delivery app. And the reason behind that was because I didn't want to give in to big businesses such as Uber and Grubhub, because that would have displaced our delivery meant. That would affect them, and we wanted to keep them. So we want to keep everything local. We also try to make conscious of what affects us. It's not about commodity and what will help us to, but we also have to see how it will affect the community, because we want that community to continue existing for my baby niece, for her to grow there. So if we see that our existence is, or our actions are gonna affect our community, then we take that sacrifice to not accept that money from that developer, that offer from that developer, because we know that they affect the community. In this case, Rubenstein. We could talk about Majora Carter and all the mass developers that's happening in the Bronx. We have I could tell you that we have so many titles. We've been in the Bloomberg Magazine, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Daily News, any major newspaper, we've been published, but I don't like to name it because at the end of the day, I am just a community member, and that's what I want that space to be, a safe space and a common space.
Thank you. Peter, can you talk about just sort of the changing nature of Belmont? I think you're on. Yeah.
Yes. Look, I'm 65 years old. I've been in that neighborhood for that long. My family's been there for over 100 years. I've watched it go from an Italian ghetto to a very mixed and diverse neighborhood, Hispanic, Black students. We have a couple of thousand students from Fordham University living there. And then this regional clientele that comes and shops there. So on any given day, it's quite a diverse set of people in the neighborhood, either living or shopping. One of the ways that I have sort of thought about community is, again, building on the ecosystem we have both locally among our businesses and in the larger area with the institutions that are around us, is by starting a business improvement district, and then which I've now chaired for the last 3 years, and that's where we find the opportunities to give back to the community, whether it's through the events that the precinct holds, or we do our own events on the holidays for the kids in the neighborhood. Those are the places where we have opportunities to really support our own community. Even though, if I had to guess, I would say the fewest number of shoppers are from our community. They are from our region. So it's this odd mix of a very vibrant business community that is not really supported by the community itself, although it's integral to how we survive. So we're trying to balance a lot of different things in this neighborhood and sustain its authenticity as a real Italian neighborhood. It still is, notwithstanding the fact that its residents aren't any longer. And so finding the right balance for all of those things is a challenge.
And you're continuing the sort of the cultural community of the Italian American neighborhood, even though that has become geographically displaced. And Dechen, can you talk about Do Kham, because you're even a broader sense. You're this kind of very small in terms of number within the city, but very important in terms of representation, and part of that. And how does that reflect?
Well, I think in going back to talking about community and thinking about, and we exist within the greater Tibetan diaspora, which is all over the world. Mm-hmm. And still have a connection to Tibet and what's happening in Tibet. And for the both of us, when you're talking about how to be a leader in your community, and you mentioned a lot about things doing it out of necessity and out of need, and kind of for us, or for me anyway, I think because the both of us are both trained activists in grassroots organizing and campaigning through different Tibet organizations that were focused on empowering youth leadership, and also knowing how to represent the story about Tibet and how to educate people and how to advocate for human rights in Tibet, and raising the profile overall in a very public sense, but then at the same time bringing it back to what we do as a family and thinking about how do we tell that story, but how do we connect it to the things we're trying to sell and to survive as a business, but also carrying a very important weight of Tibet is still not free, the Dalai Lama cannot go home, we still live in exile, and that is very much our reality. And how do we do that at the same time of surviving as a family and being able to highlight the things that we're interested in while Tibetans in Tibet are suffering very brutal repression and media is not allowed to go to Tibet? It's harder to go into Tibet with media than it is North Korea.
Wow.
That's how hard it is. And if you're talking about not just overall destruction of Tibetan culture and Buddhism inside of Tibet, you're talking about repression of Tibetan people, language, all of these different things. But we on the outside can do whatever we want. But so by being a successful business, by being present, and for the longest time, for 30 years on Prince Street, we had the Tibetan flag hanging above our storefront, which is banned in Tibet, right? Photos of the Dalai Lama are banned in Tibet. So when you're thinking about the freedom that we have to express ourselves and just to be, when you have Chinese colonialism inside of Tibet trying to crush every part of you that is your identity as a person, it makes it very easy, I think, to do it when you're out here and you have the freedom to do that and to voice your opinion and to speak up about it. And for me, it's not a difficult decision. It is the right decision to make. And by being able to express it in your business, that's something that is also, just the positive, but it is difficult because you're trying to sustain that, right, for everybody. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that.
Well, I think the only thing to add is that people are drawn to that. People in New York, Tibetans in New York, Tibetans visiting New York, Tibet supporters visiting New York. People came to our store 20 years ago and they still look for us. They remember our name. They remember that location. And I think that they're drawn to that sense of activism, that story, that we're like the living examples of this work that we're doing and the work that Tibetans in diaspora are doing. And the thing is about Chinese oppression too is that currently right now there's over 1.1 million Uyghurs in forced education camps. There are forced relocation camps, and there's almost no media coverage of that. In our story too, you can learn about so many ethnic groups in China that are oppressed by the Chinese government, and our physical store acts as a space to talk about these things. It acts as a space to, learn about meditation, sound healing from the singing bowls, and why these items are used, for centuries for healing. So I think that our store kind of serves as a center for all of these things.
Thank you. One thing that also occurs to me is that all three of your stores are these kind of gatherers of authentic story and authentic community, and I can only think that it becomes even increasingly attractive in this very sort of virtual, homogenized world. Have you seen any changes in how in people coming to you? Is there a new or different crowd of people discovering you through your community, through your activism, or just out of curiosity? Because so much of even advertising, because these are commercial establishments, has changed even in the last 10 years, to say nothing of the last 15 or 20, to say nothing of the last 30. So has that helped you in ways or harmed you? I mean, do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, so when I was arrested by the plainclothes officer without a warrant or probable cause, the plainclothes officer went up to my brother and asked for a glass of water, and demanded, very commandeering, for a glass of water. And I saw that my brother was arguing, from who I thought was another gentrifier who was upset because we didn't have avocado toast. So that was my idea in mind. So yes, gentrification has caused a new wave of very demanding clientele, very they think that it's served, that we should serve them, especially because we're immigrants. We've had a lot of Trump supporters stepped into our neighborhood, very anti-immigrant. In the United States, they are detention centers for undocumented folks. So we have a lot of casa hogares in the Bronx as well, which are houses that are hold undocumented children there. So to have that change of gentrification, that's displacing my neighbors. They're usually people of color, street vendors, Mexicans, indigenous folks like me, out of this, and pushing them out of our neighborhood and having more white, higher class folks moving into plays a lot of it affects us, because then we also have to look out for all these culture vultures who are like, oh, the Bronx and the hip hop and all this, and throw fancy parties that are so insensitive, like the Bronx is burning. And we have like the borough president, Ruben Diaz Jr., who doesn't cares about us and supports big corporations such as Fresh Direct, when we were boycotting in a local level against it due to the air pollution that's already very high. It's one of the highest in the country. So it's unfair how the new constituencies are being heard, because they're for more corporate and more of a higher class compared to the majority poor people of color, working class, that has built from the burning times of the Bronx.
Mm. I'll open it up for, unless anyone else has to add, open up for a few questions.
It's more of an anecdote. This is you, gentlemen. I recently had to have some medicine transferred. I live in Riverdale, and so I went to my local Rite Aid, and I had to have some medicine transferred. So they transferred it over to East 184th Street, across just behind St. Barnabas, which I didn't even know where it was. You know, I thought I knew the Bronx, and I didn't even know it. So, and I saw that there was no train, nearby, or like in the wasteland there. There's a bus, and the nearest bus is it's the number 9, which is near me, near 231st Street. So I ended up biking, and I thought I knew Arthur Avenue, but I didn't know Arthur Avenue. And I went down there, and I just, it's just so, you just, again, like in my neighborhood, you feel like you're in another area. But now that I know your store, I'm definitely going to go and explore.
Can I?
Yeah.
I mean, this is something I did want to touch on, because we are in a transportation desert. And one of the biggest challenges we have, and my guess is we're not the only neighborhood like this in the city, our clientele, we know, we've done the homework and the data gathering, comes from 10 to 40 miles away. Now, that may not matter if you're thinking about community, but we also employ 1,500 people, most of whom are in our community. So in order for us to sustain ourselves, people have to drive to get to us. One of the biggest challenges we have is with the city of New York, which has a one-size-fits-all ideology around transportation. People don't come by bicycle to shop. People do not come on scooters to shop. People drive, and they are making it nearly impossible. I mean, I watched a 75-year-old business in Queens close, Men's Best. Don't know the man, saw it on TV. Family-owned business, 3 generations, 75 years, in 1 year. I'm pretty sure people didn't stop eating pastrami. In 1 year, he closed his business because the city of New York put bike lanes in, took the parking spaces away, and his business was completely dependent on vehicular traffic. Now, I bicycle, so I'm all for it. But one size doesn't fit all in this town, and the city of New York doesn't start to figure this out. They are going to destroy neighborhoods like Belmont, single-handedly. My guess is it's happening in Yorkville, or what we used to call Yorkville. They still call it Yorkville? Germantown, we used to call it when I was a kid. But this is a really serious issue in this city for small business. My guess is you guys have your own kinds of issues like that, where government, which is much bigger now than it was 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, has a huge impact on your ability to do business. I mean, I'm curious if others have
Please.
similar problems.
Can I add on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so with us, our major problem is how the NYPD decides to take all the parking spots and spends as much time as they want to there, just having their personal car just parked. It could be months and it's still there. As well as even worse, parking on top of the sidewalks and just being predators around the NYCHA buildings and just walking like nonchalantly on top of the street walk and blocking also the wheelchair access railroads. So that's our major concern. Just like the mass amount of police cars and personal police cars being parked around wherever they want, however they want, without any sense of accountability, and which draws fear in our neighborhood, a sense of fear.
And I just know our offices are in the East Village, and thank God I don't get a lot of walk-in business. But when they were talking about the L train kind of catastrophe, there was profound concern by people on 14th Street about losing all of that walk-through traffic because they just wouldn't be, everyone who came in through Williamsburg and then transferred up through 14th Street, they would have lost all that. So that's another example of other concerns.
That happened with the Second Avenue subway. Mm-hmm. I mean, and they're still going to expand it up north.
Someday.
That's what happened. A whole bunch of businesses like Jackson Hole, which I patronized, they closed their Second Avenue location right off of 85th Street.
Yeah. Cindy?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm not saying the topics were all comfortable, but I appreciate it. Thank you. My question is, I have your website. What's your website? And I do want your website. And my question is, besides books, does your community need clothes, or that's taken care of from nonprofits or something?
See, the thing with non-for-profits, they're wonderful, except that they're very bureaucratic. So, so sometimes somebody calls us in the middle of the night and saying like, "Hey, my cousin is getting released, or my daughter is getting released, and we need somebody to pick them up." What we do is we have a list of volunteers, ranging from housing to transportation to just monetary needs, covering anything, to like clothing. So we are like, "Hey, we have this kid who's 4 years old. Your daughter is also 4 years old," because we also know people by name, and we love to have dinners at our customer's house. So we'll just talk to them, and we're like, "Do you think you could give us a pair or two of clothes?" And so that's how we mobilize when it comes to resources. We just use what we have, and we've earned our community trust because they could see where it's going through. The same thing with our employees. They earn as much as we do, sometimes even more. But we also feel that it's a matter of how much you need and how much else is in excess.
If somebody wanted, though, I guess I didn't word it well, and I appreciate your answer because I've seen it more than I asked for. Books, you said people can drop off.
Yes.
Right? So Is your website lamorada.com?
Oh, yes, so lamorada.nyc.com. For any extra, there's forms there that you could add if you want to donate stuff or anything of that sort. And we're always very, we're also very community orientated. So we'll post things like, let's go, we have this rally coming up, or we need donations for so-and-so. We're at 308 Willis Avenue, 141st Street. Yes.
The best website is through the BID, through the business district, BronxLittleItaly.com.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to cut this short because we're running late now, and we have food that we want to give everybody. So please give our panelists a warm round of applause.